All right, well, let's get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and Blue and Baby for joining us for this webinar. Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Angie Sanchez. I am a PhD student in the Department of Geography, Environment, and Spatial Sciences at Michigan State, and my research focuses on increasing access to breastfeeding support resources in Indigenous communities. And so, as part of my dissertation work, I got a grant to bring the Indigenous lactation counselor training to a bunch of communities in Michigan. So we are doing that work. But in addition, I wanted to provide some opportunities for healthcare providers, other lactation workers, nurses, everybody else, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, to be able to also have some learning opportunities that cannot take the, I know I can see her out of the corner of my eye, that cannot take the Indigenous lactation counselor training program and get that certification. So this is just an opportunity for folks to join in and learn some things on their own. And sorry, we just had lunch, and so it's after lunch tummy grumbles that
It's really
we're
loud.
so I apologize if you hear tummy grumbles.
I apologize because it's my tummy.
It's so loud in here. So
We all turned.
I will not be surprised if you guys if the mic picks it up, because that's how loud it is. Anyway, so sorry.
No shame. It's all
Entertaining.
good.
Neither do I. It's all good. So I have Kim and Cami here, who are Indigenous IVCLCs who run the Indigenous lactation counselor training, and they are here as the infant feeding experts to facilitate some conversations and hang out, talk to people, and also drop some of that knowledge that we all need. So I appreciate them for being here. So I am going to pass the mic over to them, and then they're going to do their introductions, and then Blue, they'll just start asking you some questions. Feel free to just talk away, whatever. It's all good, and don't worry about Baby or anything else. Just be mama. We're fine with all of that. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kimberly Moore-Salas. I'm Danae. I'm from Arizona, born in Tuba City on the Navajo Reservation. I currently moved to Humboldt County, which is in Northern California, almost a year ago, and I currently do different community projects throughout Indian country. Been doing this work with Cami since the end of 2017, teaching the Indigenous breastfeeding, Indigenous lactation counselor course. So we've been doing that pretty much all summer, and also do other community projects again throughout Indian country. I'm also a lactation consultant. I've been certified for at least 10 years, been doing this work for over 12 years. But I like to say my experience comes from being a breastfeeding mother to my, she's 20, she'll be 22 now. So I like to say my experience goes over 22 years. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. I'm Petiwashte Mitakiapi. Good afternoon, my relatives. So my name's Cami Goldhammer. I'm Sisseton Wapatum from South Dakota. And I live in Duwamish territory, also known as Seattle, Washington. And I'm really grateful to be here. I'm a lactation consultant, clinical social worker, and full spectrum Indigenous doula, and teach the Indigenous lactation counselor training along with Kim. So we're really grateful to be here and for everyone's time. And Blue, will let you introduce yourself and your baby. You can introduce yourself just how you would normally introduce yourself to community. We have a really diverse group of folks joining us today. So you can do that, and then we'll do kind of an introduction to what we're going to talk about today.
Bonjour, my name is Blue Lopez. I'm an enrolled member of Keweenaw Bay Indian Community. I'm also Little River Odawa. I grew up in the Muskegon area, but reside in Lansing, Michigan. And this is Selena, baby Selena. She's 7 months.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Baby
Yeah.
Selena.
She's so cute.
so cute, so happy. Awesome. Well, I guess for a little bit of an intro, so our conversation today, we don't have anything formal, like we're not doing a PowerPoint or anything for folks that have joined our previous sessions. We've kind of had a mix of like a more formal
Mhm.
lecture type presentation to more conversation. So this is going to be another kind of conversation. And I believe this is titled When Breastfeeding Doesn't Work Out, right?
Or
And
when things don't go as planned.
don't
So
go
it
as
could really just
planned.
be
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't go
anything.
as planned.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a really, really, really important topic. About 60% of the general population breastfeeding doesn't go as planned. So people, about 60% of the general population does not meet their breastfeeding goals. We know that there is disparities when it comes to breastfeeding, especially for Black and Indigenous parents. And so we can kind of guess, even though we don't have the actual statistics, but we can kind of guess that those numbers are higher in the Native community. And it can be a really, there's a spectrum of how it impacts families when their breastfeeding experience doesn't go as they planned, to, being like, it didn't work out, to being suicidal, right? And it's a broad spectrum of how people feel. And as lactation providers and people
Mhm.
working within the lactation community, it's really important that we recognize how this impacts families, because like everything else, it matters significantly, and we have an opportunity to support families in a good way, in a way that they can feel loved and cared for throughout their postpartum experience, or we can blow them off and
Mhm.
just tell them it's no big deal and not provide any
Yeah.
support, and just go ahead and stop and it's cool, and not really thinking about the long-term impacts on that. Kim and I can attest
Mhm.
that every single Indigenous lactation training we do, that we have elders in our class that grieve their breastfeeding experience,
Mhm.
right? They are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and they didn't know, and then they'll be taking our class and they'll say things like, how did I know? I
Yeah.
didn't even know how important
Yeah.
it was, or I didn't have any support, or I was told that, that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. And so these are things that parents carry for a very, very, very long time, and well beyond the time that they leave your care, right? So yeah, so it can be an emotional conversation, it can be a heavy conversation. Blue, we're so grateful. Kim and I haven't met Blue, so we actually
Mhm.
know nothing about Blue's story. So you guys will kind of get to hear us just like how we would maybe talk with a family. You'll kind of see how we do that. And so Blue, we're grateful for you sharing your story and your truth and your vulnerability. You're in it, you're in the thick of it with an infant. And so we, just really appreciate your time and sharing your experiences with the other folks on the webinar.
Yeah.
Did you have anything to add to that?
No, I just want to say that your baby looks like she wants to tell her story. She looks right in the
She does.
camera, like,
Looks
I
right.
need to tell my story. What happened to me and my mom?
I love it.
Oh, it's just so
Yeah.
cute.
Yeah. So yeah, with that, or Angie, did you have anything you wanted to add, since this was something that kind of, I know like you posted about this
Yeah.
and you had
You
a
had
lot
a
of
lot of people.
responses
Yeah.
of people that were willing to share their
Absolutely.
experiences. And I think, yeah,
it just goes to, speak to the what you were just talking about, the fact that so many things happen to us that we sometimes internalize, or sometimes
Mhm.
we don't talk about it, or we don't get opportunities to, and it's kind of a healing process to be able to talk through these things. So I really appreciate everybody that was like, I'll talk, I'll come
Mhm.
on. And, sometimes things happen and it didn't work out, and that's totally okay. Like, it's
Mhm.
totally fine. We got Blue on last minute, and then also at some point, hopefully another friend of mine will jump in. She's added as a panelist as well. But she had a previous commitment. So she may jump on at some point too. But yeah, it's just things didn't go as planned for me, and that's what got me to this
Mhm.
work that I'm
Mhm.
doing, and what got me to the PhD program and all the work that I'm doing. And so I just wanted to honor other people that also have had, some things go awry along the way, that really wanted to share their story. So I appreciate everybody, and I appreciate Blue and baby Selena. Anything for Selena's joining us. She's gonna hear that her whole life.
Yeah. Selena.
Yes. Thank you. So miigwech, Blue and baby.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So maybe Blue, just start out by telling us a little bit. Is Selena your first baby first?
She's my first.
Okay, so maybe just start out by telling us a little bit about your pregnancy, kind of, when you thought about feeding your baby, what what your plans were, kind of who had spoken to you, anything around that, kind of before Selena was born.
So I was a breastfed baby, and my brother, I only have one brother, he was also breastfed. So because of my mom breastfeeding us, I knew that, when and if I went to have a child, that I would be breastfeeding. Um, this is totally unrelated to the topic, but I actually struggled with infertility, and Selena is an IVF.
Okay.
Um, knowing, like really just planning being a mother and really wanting that, I knew while I was pregnant that I was going to be determined to breastfeed and do everything that I could to make sure that I breastfed her, because just knowing all the, education out there about
Mhm.
amazing it is for our babies and the connection that you have with your baby when you're breastfeeding. So
Yeah. During your pregnancy, did you, like when you would follow up with your appointments, was that a question they would ask you like right away or during your appointments? I'm just curious to see how much they asked, because I feel like sometimes that doesn't happen on a regular, and it kind of, you know, it's not always a priority for care providers. I mean, providers to ask families or mothers if they plan to breastfeed or any kind of education.
I actually, now that you say that, I cannot recall being asked that question until I was in the hospital getting induced to have her. So that is not anybody asked or talked to me about. But obviously, a little bit later on, when I get into my story, it might make a little bit more sense
Mm,
because 6 weeks early. So maybe that's something they, start talking to when you get a little bit closer. But I don't recall being asked about the subject at all,
Okay.
honestly.
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, maybe just start by telling us a little bit about Selena's birth, and kind of, it's always a good place to start for a
Hmm.
breastfeeding story. Yeah. So tell us whatever you feel is important or relevant, even because I'll even say, like, even though you said that you didn't think it was quite relevant, but how a baby is conceived is actually
Yeah, it's
relevant a lot
very,
of
yep,
times to a breastfeeding story. So there may be, that actually might be really important information as
yeah,
we kind of go through. So
yeah.
yeah.
And just a quick note, with the education not provided during pregnancy is a really, really important part of your pregnancy. I used to work in a hospital, and a lot of families I would see, the first feeding is usually me asking them, how do you plan to feed your baby? And they've never been asked that their whole pregnancy. And so by the time they get to having their baby, they don't have that, information about how important it is and how important those first feeds are. So, but yeah, it's really important. And I hope that um, in the future, or even now, we start learning how to language, using language, talking to, mothers when they go get a weight check, or even a MA to talk to the mom. Have you thought about breastfeeding? Those are so important in those early days of pregnancy and later after. So thank you for sharing that. That's really important.
Yeah. So tell us about Selena's birthday.
Okay, so I was a high risk pregnancy, a lot to do because I had a previous history of miscarriages. So I was in and out of my OBGYN's office a lot. I had a high risk doctor. And I would say at 35 weeks or so, they started to notice that my blood pressure was rising. Everything else had come back normal and was going perfectly fine with her. Pregnancy wise, it was just my blood pressure started to rise. And within a week, I ended up in the hospital because they told me that I should buy a blood pressure cuff. And so I was checking my blood pressure, and it was sky high, high enough where they told me if your blood pressure gets that high, you need to go into labor and delivery immediately. So I went to the hospital and they immediately put me on magnesium, and told me they were shipping me off to Sparrow, which is the larger hospital in Lansing, because they were thinking that it was very possible they were going to want to induce labor, but they weren't sure because I was at that point 35 weeks and 5 days.
Okay.
Over to the hospital, and after talking to the NICU doctors, they decided that they did want to induce my labor. And at that point, I was close enough to 36 weeks. So I was planning on doing a vaginal delivery, but even with breastfeeding and delivery wise, pretty much nothing went to plan when it came to Selena. I got dilated to a 6, but in the meantime, they noticed that her heart rate was dropping during some of the contractions. And so that was a concern for obviously me as well as the doctors. Sorry, she's getting
No, it's okay. Is it nap time?
it's cranky, yep. So with that, we were keeping an eye on it. I might actually need to feed her.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go right ahead. That's what we're here for. So while she's herself ready, so Sparrow, that's the hospital that I gave birth at.
Yeah, well, I
And
was going to ask how far away that was.
so
Mhm.
they're both in Lansing, and they're, I don't know, I'd say not more than probably 4 or 5 miles apart from each other. And I remember, and I'm going to tell this because Blue had, messaged me about it, when she was about to go in, like I
Mhm.
think they want me to come in. And I had mentioned something about, like, Sparrow, that's where I'm at, and that's where I
Mhm.
was at. And, I don't know the experience over there, but here's how it is at Sparrow, and blah, blah, blah. And then sure enough, like a couple hours later, she's like, they sent me to Sparrow. And I'm like, good, glad. Because I know what that
You knew.
hospital
Yeah.
is gonna do for you. I couldn't speak to the other one. I didn't, I wasn't
Yeah.
gonna say anything bad or good about him. I just was saying I knew that Sparrow would
Mhm.
help take care of her once she got over there. So I was glad
Yeah.
that she was able to get over there and have the care from the folks over there
Yeah.
at Sparrow. So
Yeah. Yeah. And how far away, Blue, was Sparrow from where you lived?
So the hospital I went to was McLaren, and that one was within a 5-minute drive from my house. Sparrow's probably 15 to 18 minutes,
Okay,
I'd
so
say.
it was close.
Yeah,
Yeah,
not too
you didn't
far.
have to leave your community or anything to get that's where you lived. Okay, good to know. All right, cool. Okay, so
So they induce labor.
induced labor, you are at a 6, her heart rate was dropping. And I think that's where we left
Yeah.
off.
Is a good part of my story too, because she was a really good resource for me starting out. Was somebody that I reached out to, and she did help me a lot in this process, and that's part of my story. Thank you for bringing that up, because there are some things here to mention that were, I think, essential to my success in breastfeeding, even struggle. Um, so we were talking to the doctors, and it was concerning to me that her heart rate seemed to be dropping. And I mentioned, is it possible that maybe we should just move to a C-section, because this is kind of scaring me? And they're like, well, she's recovering. So, pacifier.
You don't have to
She-
apologize.
Right on. She's like, right on time. I gotta speak my story.
Yeah.
So I mentioned, that it was kind of scaring me, and was maybe a C-section something we should move to, and they said, well, she's recovering, so we'll just go ahead and keep going with it. You wanted to do a vaginal delivery, so that's what we want for you as well. So we'll try to stick to that plan. And then it wasn't within, I think, like a half hour, her heart rate dropped so low that my nurse hit some kind of button, and I had about 15 staff members rushing into my room. And well, actually, I kind of messed that up. Her heart rate dropped another time, and they came in and said, you want to know what, Mom? You had good intuition. I think it moved towards the C-section. And so we were starting to get ready. I guess it's common for the nurse and like my husband, they were supposed to eat a snack to get ready to go into the procedure room, I guess, to make sure they didn't faint. And so everybody was in the process of kind of getting ready for my C-section. Somebody else was already in there getting one. Sorry.
It's okay.
Everybody was getting ready. Like my husband didn't even have on the little gown. And at that point, and my nurse had been by my side. She was amazing. She was a big key to my success as well. But she had been by my side like the whole night. And she had, again, just walked out for that split second to have a snack. And she came running in because Selena's heart rate, they couldn't even find it at first. And so she was calling for help. And that's when about 15 staff members rushed in. It was extremely scary.
Mhm.
Had already had an epidural at that point. And I don't know for sure, but I kind of think it affected like my blood pressure and kind of made it tanked. And maybe that's what kind of affected her and her heart rate. I was not feeling good at all. And then that's when things went kind of sour for her. And so they rushed me into the operating room. I guess the lady was placing an epidural on somebody's back and she had to pull it out. And within 9 minutes, they had Selena out. I was able to, like, right before they were cutting me open, ask, like, could you find her heart rate? And they did on it, but it's only at a 65. So we're going to get her out. And as soon as I heard a cry, like I felt a sense of relief. It was extremely traumatic. Just going through everything I went through and getting right down to that last minute and worrying about her. And then shortly after that, they took her up to the NICU. I was still on magnesium for my blood pressure, so I wasn't able to see her in person for 24 hours. And I was having health issues going on where they were giving me, they gave me like some liquid Benadryl because I was itchy from something from the procedure. And it, some way that they ended up having, they thought I had like a blood clot because I have a blood clotting disorder. So they thought that I was having like a blood clot in my lung. And that was scary too. Like my mom and my husband were worried about, if I was going to pull through, and then just going through everything we went through with Selena. And so Selena was in the NICU, and thankfully, the only thing that she needed help with was learning how to feed, and she needed the bilirubin light. But otherwise, 6 weeks early on the dot, by the time that she was born, those were the only two health issues or, concerns that ended up keeping her in the hospital for 2 weeks. And during this time, throughout my labor, because it was a couple of days that all of this was going on, I was reaching out to Angie because I knew, one, that she was, breastfeeding, or, that she breastfed and that she was an advocate. And I knew that she was doing this project, and had lots of plans to educate women, Indigenous women specifically. So I knew that I could reach out to her and ask her questions. And she made sure to tell me, you're at Sparrow, that's where I was at. They were super helpful. Make sure that they give her donor milk. That's an option there. Tell them that you don't want, and that is something that while I was in labor, I mentioned, and my nurse brought me a paper right away, and had me sign it, saying that I wanted her to have donor milk. And we ended up needing the donor milk for, I think, about 5 days until I could get my supply to where it needed to be, where she didn't need it from pumping. But from there, like I said, I had an amazing nurse. And she immediately, I was still not feeling good and had all the tests and everything going on, but she brought me that pump. She told me I need, so I pumped. And I don't think at that point, with how traumatized I was from everything, that I would have even thought, or, even the way that I felt just health wise, that I would have pumped. It's not something that I think would have even came across my mind. I
Totally.
worried about the baby, worried about me. So I owe a lot to that nurse, her to stay on me, and she would come in every 2 to 3 hours and say, okay, it's time to pump. And, made sure that the next nurse that was taken over, knew what I was doing, knew what my goal was, and made sure to stay helping me as well.
Mom, let me tell my story. Dang it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, do you want me to just kind of continue on to
Yeah.
the breast? So from there, I was lucky enough to be, because I do have a stepdaughter that I raised full time with my husband. And her grandmother took her in for those 2 weeks because she knew that, I wanted to be up at the hospital as much as possible. And so I was up there, 12 to 15 hours a day sometimes, pumping and making sure to feed her, because she had to be bottle fed, because they said how young she was, that it would just, she wasn't, she didn't even really know how to drink a bottle good, let alone trying to latch. So we worked on latching. They had a lactation consultant that I met with, but when I met with her, it was literally the, I don't know, I'd been out off of the magnesium for maybe like 4 hours since I had fully gotten off of it. And I don't know if anybody.
Yeah, I was going to say, why don't you tell folks what it's like to be on magnesium and how it makes you feel? Because this is actually a pretty common medication that's given to people to regulate blood pressure, right? And so, or lower blood pressure. And it definitely makes a parent feel a certain way. So kind of, yeah, if you want to explain a little bit about how you were feeling on it, and yeah.
I honestly felt horrible on it. The best way to describe it is almost um, like loopy. I don't know. I just felt like my eyes hurt even. I I didn't feel really hungry, even though I should have been super hungry because I couldn't even eat while I was on the magnesium.
Neighbor. Yeah.
And then even the 24 hours after, because of being on it, they wouldn't let me have food. But I just felt like I was gonna get sick. And there's another part of the story to this because I did end up having to go back in. I got released from the hospital, and I was going up there to see her. And I had only been home a night, and I didn't feel good again, and my blood pressure was up again, and they told me that you can still have preeclampsia postpartum. So I actually back into the hospital, and they gave me magnesium again. And that time I felt like it was worse, and I actually noticed that my supply, like I had, been pumping. At that point, I did a hospital stay of 4 days. So by the time I went back in, it was day 6. So pumping enough where I kind of knew what I was getting from pumping. And I noticed that while I was on the magnesium that my supply was dropping. And it also made me like not even, I mean, I think if I wasn't as determined, I'm not sure that I would have even wanted to pump, just the way that I felt. It just was not a good feeling at all. I guess there really is no complete good way to describe it. It's almost like some bad sickness, but you don't really get sick from it. Like I didn't throw up or anything like that, but I was just ready to be off of it. And then I had to go another 24 hours without seeing her when I went back in from being on it again. So that luckily was the last time that I had to be on it though, because after that I didn't have problems. They put me on a blood pressure medication to lower my blood pressure. And so from there, I was just going to her hospital room and making sure to pump and feed her, be there as much as possible, try to work on latching. But what, like I said, I think I always do this too. I kind of got straight away. I met with a lactation consultant before I checked out the first time. And I feel like because I was on the magnesium or like shortly coming off of it, that I couldn't really pay attention to her almost. And I think it was still part of the trauma of the birth and the fact that it was the second time even that I got to see my own child, that I just couldn't, I couldn't really pay attention. And I felt like I really needed to know what she was saying too, because I had a lot of plans to research and try to figure out breastfeeding, what I needed to do. I thought I had a couple of more weeks. I did have a planned induction at 37, or no, at that point, they were going to do it at 38 weeks. So I thought I had a little bit more time, and I was working on getting everything ready to have her home. And I know it seemed kind of silly because, okay, you got that far, but you hadn't, figured out, your game plan for breastfeeding. Up here, and you'll have a lactation consultant, somebody that will come in and help you for breastfeeding when you get there. So I kind of put that to the back burner, I guess, because I thought there, and I just felt like the help that I got at that moment, it either was rushed on her end or maybe a mixture, but I just felt like I wasn't in the position to really be able to intake what she was trying to tell me. So I felt like the one time that I did get to meet with somebody when I was there wasn't as helpful, but there were some amazing nurses that worked at the hospital that helped like get me a nipple shield because she just was not trying to latch on at all without a nipple shield. And it actually probably took her, I would say, maybe till she was about a week and a half to even try to latch onto the nipple shield. So it was a lot of bottle feeding, and I felt like they had really high expectations for how much breast milk that she should be drinking.
Mm.
And like they were like, oh, okay, she can't, she's not gonna be able to leave until she's drinking enough. But I just felt like every day they were raising it. And I know that, we're supposed to be able to produce what our babies need. And I wasn't producing anything close to that amount, for at least, 6 to 7 days. So I wasn't understanding how I wasn't producing anywhere close to what they expected her to drink. So that was very discouraging, I guess, because I didn't know, like, okay, why I've heard of people being underproducers,
Yeah.
And so at that point, I was still writing Angie, and I'm asking questions about, like, okay, can I like have some lactation cookies, or what can I do? And she was just basically saying, you need to drink your fluids. That's the main thing. Eat eat good, but the main thing is hydrating yourself. And she told me, to stay away from stuff with fenugreek, which if I hadn't have talked with her, I probably would have went and bought some of that stuff, because
Yeah.
I was really determined to try to up my supply so that she could get off donor milk, and also just be able to produce enough for her. And I wanted to be able to have backup for if she got watched. Girl, you are just acting a fool, ain't you?
She
And
wants
so-
the earrings.
Yeah.
She's like, when is it my turn to have
I
some
know.
big blingy earrings, mama?
Yeah. It's always when moms are busy that babies start,
Oh, yeah.
get fussy
Yeah.
and like want your attention. Yeah.
The hour prior, she was
and-
probably just quiet,
Yeah.
never just
Yeah.
leave me alone, mom. And
Yeah.
now she's like,
And I will say, Blue, like for you, you're in it, holding her and hearing her, but she's actually not very loud at all.
Yeah.
Like we can barely
Yeah.
hear her. Like we can tell you're like moving her around and stuff. And
Yeah.
but like on our end, it's just not nearly as, it impacts your brain a little differently than it does us. We're just like, oh, listen to these sweet little angel baby noises. Like it's so sweet, but it's actually not nearly as bad as it might feel like to you, kind of being center stage right now. So we can put your mind at ease a little bit
yes.
there. So yeah, we just hear little noises
Yeah.
and you guys are doing great.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I found a place, but she finally got to a point where she was drinking enough, and they wanted her to do that for a couple of days in a row before they would even consider releasing her. But at that point, it was still from a bottle, and I got a pump from my insurance for free, but I hadn't even really thought like that I was going to need to use it much, because luckily, my husband and I are in a position where I am a stay-at-home mom after, giving birth to her, and that was something in our plan. So my plan was to just breastfeed, and okay, yeah, I might have the pump to be able to pump some, for when she would need to be watched. But I was at that point an exclusively pumping mom. And my mom's even talked about it, that if she don't know if she was put in the same position that I was put in, if she would have been able to stay on that pumping schedule, waking myself 3 hours, doing power pumps, and being so determined to stay on that, because it's already emotionally and draining to have your child in the NICU hospital away from you, and losing sleep over that, but then also pumping and then having to clean all the supplies. So she got to come home, and at that point she was still bottle feeding. So I ended up reaching out to a lactation consultant, but I was kind of on the edge of doing that, even though during normal, like non-COVID times, it wouldn't have even been a question. I for sure would have done it, but I obviously wanted to be as extremely cautious as I can't even talk. I wanted to be as cautious as possible, because of COVID, for my newborn, especially her being a preemie. But I knew that if I was going to actually try to breastfeed her and not, be a pumping breastfeeding mom, then I would need help. So I ended up finding somebody that could do virtual meets, but she really recommended that I come in at least one time. So I came in there and she did an exam on Selena, and she found that she had a tongue tie and a lip tie. And so she recommended me to actually my other daughter's dentist, who is the one locally that does the procedures to correct that. And so I had a talk with my husband because I don't know, it sounded scarier than it actually ended up being.
Right.
A laser her tongue and lip, like that sounds horrible just for me to breastfeed. I don't know if I want to put her through that. And I read up a lot about it, and we took a couple of days to decide, and we decided that, it was something that I was passionate about doing before she was born. And so it was something that we still wanted to go ahead and do, since people were like, it sounds worse than it is. So we took her for it, and she immediately, they had me feed her after the procedure within 15 minutes of her having it done, and she was latched. And I had her latched maybe a couple times, but she latched and nursed for 15 minutes, and I was amazed at how quick, especially after it just happening, that she was latching. And so I was continuing to go to that lactation consultant, and we kind of came up with a plan for how we were going to go about, we didn't want to just completely skip the bottle and only do breast. We wanted to make sure she was getting enough that the doctor wasn't going to be concerned. So, we replaced, I think it was like every third, and then it moved to every other, with I'm busy right now. You were supposed to take a nap. You need to lay down, please. So we started replacing with nursing, and she was doing great. Even the same day that we got home from that procedure, she nursed for 30. She nursed minutes, which I thought the 15 minutes was amazing. And sorry, give me just 1 second.
Okay. It's okay.
So cute.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you just hear the story?
I know all the
things.
things.
Yeah.
All the things. And I think what is really important for folks to understand is how typical this story is for especially Native moms, right? Where our babies are more likely to be born premature and kind of go through this. And then, Blue saying she came from a breastfeeding family, right? They kept that tradition going. And so she had that determination and had resources like Angie and other people to reach out to.
She got a breast pump.
Totally.
Right?
You can, and a nurse that was supportive, there's just so many things that if that one thing wasn't there, it could have completely derailed, derailed the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and just the follow-up with the lactation consultant, getting the tongue clip, all those things were really important. And it was part of her breastfeeding journey too.
And it was a private practice lactation consultant. She didn't get what she needed from the hospital LC, which is another thing that's really, well, that's kind of what I got from what you were saying is, it was, you were getting support from the hospital LC, but weren't really in a position, where it was rushed. And then on top of the medication you were on, it made it really hard to take that in. And then where the private practice LC, typically we're spending hours with someone, in private practice, but you pay out of pocket for that. Sounds like you had a couple visits, so you probably paid
Mm.
out of pocket for all those. And so we can see how like another mom in a different situation who maybe didn't have those resources, didn't have, the ability to access it, wouldn't have been able to do
Oh
those
yeah,
things.
totally. And then the fact that she could get herbs if she needed
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
that's so
Yeah.
important to know that not everyone has that same support. So, and you were determined, like that's amazing.
That goes a long
Yeah,
way.
it goes a long
Yes,
way. Totally.
determination goes a long
Yeah.
way.
You're like, I'm not quitting. We're doing this.
Yeah.
What's next? Like, come on. Like you're just like doing all the things to make sure your baby is going to be breastfed. And because your family did it, like you said, your mom did it with you, and your mom did it with your brother. I think that's so important. Like I went through some things with breastfeeding, and had I not seen it or done it, like or seen my mom do it, my family, because it was in our family, it was so important. Like this is normal. This is how I'm gonna feed my baby, and I didn't see any other way. Versus if I didn't see it, like you never saw
Yeah,
it.
I never seen it. And I
Yeah.
think if I had a problem, I would have been like, oh, well,
Yep. I'm
this
okay.
is another problem. Like, I guess I'll do,
Yeah.
I'll just formula feed. Like,
Yeah.
I really didn't have like a strong commitment at all.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't grown up around it.
Yeah. Yep.
So cool. All right.
I think she's on mute because we couldn't hear her.
Oh,
She's
yeah.
saying
Go
something.
ahead.
Yeah.
No, she actually just laid down and is just hanging out now for some reason. I actually wasn't stop, right? So I mean at the point that we're at, it actually is kind of where it turned into my journey getting a lot easier. She continued to uh, at that point we just kept working towards breastfeeding. And I will say that her pediatrician was extremely supportive throughout this as well. And, she talked about how she breastfed, and, she was helping me, telling me that I can give you any resources you need. If you're wanting to breastfeed, I understand that it's hard, but I think you can get to a point where, she's actually gonna breastfeed from you and not taking your milk from a bottle. So, I think that was also helpful. And like I mentioned, just all the things in my past, and people that just kind of make me feel like I would get there eventually, even though it might be hard and I wasn't getting a lot of sleep. I knew going into having a baby that, they always say kids aren't easy, you're not gonna get a lot of sleep. I knew that was true. I was prepared for that. And I think that a lot of people aren't, and I, going into having her, I was 32 years old. So,
Mhm.
in 15, 18, even 20, 25, and going through some of the stuff that I went through. But because I feel like my age and readiness for having her gave a lot of the determination that I had for continuing to breastfeed and continuing on with my plan for her. So at that point, my doctor was just like, you want to know what? I know you're a lactation consultant saying that you kind of need to do this schedule, but I can tell you that with her weight gain from when you told me that she had her correction for her tongue and lip, that I am not concerned in the least about her weight gain. So if you want to just try to feed her solely from your breast and stop the bottles completely, you can come in here and do weigh-ins, or you can see if you can go see her. But I can tell you that I'm completely comfortable with you just attempting to feed her and going that route if that's comfortable for you. So at that point, I was still a little bit worried. So I mostly breastfed her, but I would still periodically, like before nighttime, do a bottle for maybe 3 to 4 days. And after she just seemed to keep doing, everything was still going really good, I felt like, and I was feeling comfortable with how she seemed hunger wise. It wasn't like she was cluster feeding. Or just seeming hungry, or guzzling the bottle down. Sometimes she wouldn't even finish what she would give when I try to give her a bottle. So then eventually it just turned into breastfeeding, and now I have a spoiled baby. who is 7.5 months now. And she will take a bottle if needed. So I lucked out there. But she, barely gets a bottle unless for some reason I need her to be watched. So um, luckily, my story was a success, like I said, because I think of a multitude of things, but I could see where a lot of other people give up because there were points where I was like, this is a lot mentally.
Yeah. And she's only breastfeeding now.
Correct. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of
I
a lot of
know.
things to overcome for sure.
Yeah, especially the magnesium. I've seen a lot of mothers after C-section get that, and they're just lethargic, tired, loopy, don't want to breastfeed. Even the pumping was hard. So you to continue that, and especially having that support where that the pump was given to you as soon as you had your baby
Mhm.
is so important. A lot of times it's, not a priority. It's just like mom sleep, let mom sleep.
Or they
Yeah.
rely on the parent to request it,
Yeah.
and so this is a situation where, we think we have healthcare providers attending this, and,
Mhm.
these are geared toward healthcare providers, but a lot of times, especially nurses who maybe aren't as confident in their practice, or they don't want to see, there's a big fear of being too pushy when it comes to breastfeeding, right? There's a lot of stigma among healthcare, like we can't pressure moms, and
Yeah.
we have to be careful, and we can't be too pushy and things like that. So what most healthcare providers actually end up doing is nothing.
Yeah.
Right. Which is results in people not breastfeeding. And that's something that we actually, and like evidence kind of talks about that. There's research around, particularly with Black moms, because, as we know, Native people, we are rarely included in, like our population is so small that it's often not
Not
statistically
studied. Yep.
significant or whatever. Thank you, genocide and colonialism, for that one. So, it's not our fault that our population is as small as it
Yes.
is, but we're not included in any statistics that's just a whole other conversation. But what we know, like with Black moms, is that many are Black parents, many of them are not actually talked to about breastfeeding because providers don't want to pressure them to breastfeed because they know their breastfeeding rates are so low, right? So it's this like kind of like catch 22 where like the breastfeeding rates are low because no one's talking to them about breastfeeding, which results in low breastfeeding rates, and people no longer talking about it. And so just we can guess similarly about the Native community,
yeah.
right? Like
The implicit
that's
bias of assuming that mom is
Right.
like, she's not going to breastfeed. We just won't try or
Right,
ask or
right.
provide any breast pump to her.
Right. And so providers or nurses can be really not feel super confident in their role of kind of being like, let's get this person pumping, let's get them
Mhm.
going, and so it's awesome that you had a nurse and I'm guessing, it sounds like you had a long induction, and so you probably got to know your nurse. It sounds like you two built a really great relationship and a strong rapport, and you were able to verbalize to her how important breastfeeding was, and the fact that you requested, if your baby needed donor milk in labor, right? That's another thing that tells a nurse like, oh, this is important to my patient, right? So she was able to, or they were able to assert their role and say like, you need to get pumping, let's go.
Mhm.
Like, I know this is your goal and you want to do this, and so we need a pump, and I'm going to be in here every couple hours and make sure you're doing it. And like, look at what that effort created.
Yeah.
Right? Like the impacts
Yeah.
of that effort, where if that hadn't have happened, honestly, we'd probably be having a very different conversation.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right? Like
Yeah.
just that move.
Yeah.
Um
I think too is one that she was able to hand off the care plan to another
Yeah.
nurse. That's huge, because I see where we're breastfeeding with a mom pumping that whole day shift, and then I come back the next day and no pumping was done that night because there was no encouragement or no assistance. So that was a huge part of your care to have. The other is like automatically asking, like you assume, like you knew you were going to breastfeed. So the next was like having a consent form signed for donor milk, like Angie being a great advocate saying ask for donor milk. Most people don't know that may be available. I know in the healthcare setting, they're trying to change that where it's not just given to premature babies, but more older babies too, because moms may need a little help or a little gap to cover those feeds to get, get breastfeeding going. And so that's really, really good to hear that you had Angie to help you. You had people there to say, here's the consent, let's get donor milk. So I think that really speaks volumes that if we can make this normalize and part of standard of care in a situation like yours, which happens a lot, that we could have a lot more successful breastfeeding stories in a hospital setting.
Yeah.
With that kind of like C-section just kind of spiraling out of control. Where Cam and I, a lot of times we don't see that. We don't see that happening often. But your story is amazing that you persevered and you were able to get the support you needed and still breastfeed, this long. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things, Blue, that I was thinking about, like when you were talking, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about this, is kind of one of the conversations we had yesterday was around trauma and
Mhm.
and how interactions make someone feel, right? And it's not so much what people do or say, it's how does it feel? And so I'm wondering if maybe you can describe a little bit about like your interactions with your nurse versus like the hospital LC, your providers, your private practice LC. Like what were your feelings that you were having in those different interactions that you think like how were positive?
That kept you motivated to keep
Yeah.
breastfeeding.
Um, so again, I'm gonna go back to the nurse that I had. Her name was Sandra. And unfortunately, she no longer works at that hospital anymore. She did end up leaving the career. So I feel bad for other people not being able to have her as an advocate for them, because she was a huge part. We connected at.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, losing an awesome nurse is a huge flag to a hospital system, right? Because we burn out the amazing ones, and that is not good for
Mhm.
families, and so I don't know like what that system is, but she sounds awesome. She sounds like she did a great job, and the fact that like she left her, like left that career and was so gifted, as far as like your relationship and experience with her is concern, should be a concern for any hospital system. So yeah.
Yeah.
I
So get on
agree.
it, hospital.
COVID, sorry, my phone was sending me a notification. With COVID going on, I know that like they were talking about, working a lot and stuff. So
Yeah.
that was going on at that hospital at the time. But a lot of our relationship, as you mentioned, I had her as my nurse for 3 of the nights that I was in there. So we had a lot of discussions. I didn't get a lot of sleep, because they were coming in and checking my blood pressure because of the preeclampsia every hour. So even if I did try to doze off for a second, it didn't last long. It seemed like somebody was coming right in.
Yep.
And so those times that she was my nurse, we had a lot of discussions and were able to talk about breastfeeding, and she was a mother herself. And it was even to the point where after I had Selena, she came back and told me like, "Hey, sorry you didn't see me right after you gave her. I had to step away," and I cried for a minute because I thought I was, that, we might not have had either one of you make it out after that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Sometimes even for a nurse, who works in labor and delivery is, my birth story. So just having somebody opening up and pushing me and guiding me, I think really inspired me to continue on. And then positive wise, I mean, even in the NICU, there were nurses, like there was a nurse, amazing nurse. She made sure I had a little iPad to see Selena and would do calls and take pictures for me when I was on the magnesium the second time. And once she found out that, it was my goal to make sure to breastfeed, she worked with me. And she actually had aspirations to become a lactation consultant herself, but said due to other things going on in her life, she couldn't do all of the hours that it would take to become certified as one. So she took it upon herself to work with the mothers that were in there with their babies in NICU and just try to guide them with, what she knew. And she had 4 children of her own. And she was absolutely amazing and a big part of my journey as well. And I would say that at the hospital, even though I did seek out a lactation consultant afterwards, but all the things that happened in the hospital is probably what gave me my biggest push to really fight for continuing on to breastfeed. Because like we talked about, if Angie wouldn't have let me know about the donor milk, and if that was something, there was so many things going on during my labor that I don't even know that it would have came up, even having the nurse that I had. She could have been put on formula and not wanted breast milk. I don't know, what could have happened. My mom said that my brother wouldn't ever let anybody babysit him. So I know I'm straying away from the topic, but so she tried to introduce formula when I was being babysat a little bit sooner with me. And I was 6 months and she introduced formula when I got babysat. And then at that point, I didn't want to.
Yeah, no,
Mhm.
no, yeah. Oh, nice try, mom. But yeah,
Yeah.
babies aren't gonna take it after 6 months of breast milk.
No.
There were just a lot of things that I worried about, and I feel like just kind of fell into place perfectly. But when I, sought out the lactation consultant, that was another thing. Like at the hospital, though, how come nobody ever checked or looked or
Right.
found under lip tie there? Why was it that I was finding out when I was reaching out to a private lactation consultant to know that I was probably going to have struggles latch wise and was struggling latch wise, before I even left the hospital. So I don't know, because she's my first, biological child, if that's something that they ever even do at the hospital. But I guess I did, upon doing my research, seeing that some people kind of even don't believe that tongue ties and lip ties can actually affect latching, that some people never get it corrected. Your child is able to latch, but just putting it as an option, I guess, for somebody to know, hey, your child does have a tongue tie or a lip tie, and it may or may not affect breastfeeding. But, just I felt like at the hospital that would have been nice to be told, so that I could look into it and do the research myself. But I, out until afterwards. So that part was extremely helpful throughout my journey as well, because I don't think that she would have, with how young she was and how she was already latching, and then the immediate difference after the corrections were made.
Yeah, that's all the evidence you need, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm in it, but they did say that some people, it doesn't change right away, and some people, they can notice it right on the first feeding after. And luckily we were one of those people, and I think that part really helped make me feel inspired as well to continue trying to actually breastfeed instead of just pumping, because I was seeing a little bit more success. So that made it easier, because I mean, when I was pumping and trying to work on feeding her, I was getting sometimes not even an hour of sleep, because you try to feed, there was one point where I was feeding her a little bit, and then I would have to top her off with a bottle and then cleaning all my pump stuff. Um, and then by the time I got back to sleep, it was time for her to wake up almost.
Right.
So
Yeah.
extremely exhausting. You just
Yeah.
crash.
When you had the lactation consultant in the hospital and she helped you and you said, I know you mentioned that she was kind of rushed. Did she at any point look at the baby's latch and look at the tongue or do any kind of like a mouth assessment at all from what you remember?
Assessment, and I will say, because I have heard, like, I don't want to seem like I'm kind of dogging her out because
No, go ahead.
people do. There's other people that were really, she really helped, and she had a lot of good, reviews and stuff like that in terms of how she could help other people. But no, but Selena was also, at that point, 6 weeks early, couldn't even really drink a bottle of good. She had to, they had the little tube going down her nose to
Mhm.
of her feeding into her stomach. So she wasn't even latching onto a bottle of good. So when I seen her, you know, she wasn't even able to do that. So trying to latch on to me, she was basically just trying to show me the different holds that I could do with her. So there wasn't much for her to go off in terms of me, but that's where I feel like I should have seen her, I guess, more.
So we don't know the whole story,
No.
like as far as like what's going on, but I will say kind of, and for you, to say that you've seen folks that have given, seem to have gotten great care from her. And so I don't, we don't know like everything, but I will say that research shows that lactation consultants, hospital-based lactation consultants spend between 10 and 20 minutes more a visit with white moms versus moms of color, right? So they spend more time with white moms that they think are going to be more successful, have more resources, that kind of thing. And this is where addressing provider bias, and I'm not saying that's what, I actually know nothing about the way this LC looks or how they identify, or anything like that. But it's something that's really important when we as providers, are working with a family, like that we do have bias, and it could, it very well could have been a situation that like this LC, saw you as a Native mom and made assumptions and decided not to do certain things or spend a certain amount of time. That could have totally not been the case, right? Like it was a busy day and there was a lot going on and you had a lot going on, and that's, the best that she could do. But I think it is really important to address and discuss, especially for the providers on here, that we recognize our own bias that we may have. And I guarantee you have it. I am constantly unpacking like my own bias, right? As a
Same.
Native person.
Same.
And so like you have it, and there is no benefit for your patients to deny it and not face it straight on, because it does translate to providing substandard care for certain populations, versus
Sure.
others. So it, again, like I don't know anything about this particular LC, but I know when I see, so I live in Seattle, and I'm part of a birth group. It's called like Birthing in the Times of COVID for the Seattle area. And it was started, at the beginning of COVID for birthing people to kind of just share their experiences of different hospital rules, what it was like, birthing in COVID and things like that. And I was struggling so much because there'd be, white mom after white mom saying like, I'm delivering at such and such hospital, like share your experiences. And white mom after white mom saying like, it's amazing. I loved it. Oh my God, get the milkshakes. Like
Mhm.
it's so good. I had the best experience. And I was like, how is it that you all have the best experiences? And the moms that I serve like are just like, we're happy that they don't die there.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of our standard of care, is that
Mhm. We don't die.
we don't die. and it's just, it was one of those things that's just so frustrating to see, because that is how racism shows up in healthcare, is providing less time with people, not going
Mhm.
that extra mile, not sitting with them. Again, easy for me to say as an outside of the hospital provider, but we do see how bias impacts those things. So something for the providers that are on here today or watch later to like just get the head out of the sand. You have bias, I guarantee it, and you got to address it, because
Yeah.
it's important.
I didn't realize, so the, I had a C-section too, and I knew like the minute I got pregnant that I was gonna have a C-section. And from every moment after that, it was, I was just expecting it. And so I would always have these like people when I would say I'm having a C-section and it's scheduled on, and it was always this, oh, I'm so sorry. And I was like, I'm fine. Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to be sorry. I'm good. Like, I've known this since the minute I got
Mhm.
pregnant. And they would always be like, why? And I'm like, because I don't want to die. And I
Mm,
didn't realize until just now when you were talking, like
mm,
how much my concern for me being alive and my baby being alive was probably rooted in the fact that I know that a lot of times we just don't come out of the
Yeah.
hospital
Yeah.
because of the,
Mm.
difference in care that is given between white moms and, indigenous and black moms. And
Right.
my thing was always, I just want to come out alive and I want to birth a live baby.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And the fact that all this other stuff, so in my head, this whole time I was just like, oh, I'm not so concerned about like whether he gets, whether I have,
Squeeze through the
yes,
birth
Yeah.
or
canal.
yes, or if I, do it, unmedicated before,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like
Like a
none of that.
blissful birth,
Yeah,
right?
like I
Yeah.
never was concerned with that stuff. And now I'm like, as I'm sitting here listening to this, like the reason for that is because I know
Yeah.
deep down, I don't have that luxury.
Yeah.
My, I don't have the luxury to be like, oh, I would like to have this
Mhm.
natural birth and, all this stuff. I just didn't. For me, it was, I just want to be alive and I want my baby to be alive.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's the extent of, for me, what my care meant look like in the
Wow.
hospital.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, like as a doula and like someone that runs a doula program, I'm always like, we need to dream bigger for ourselves, right? Like,
Yeah.
because we can,
Have
like,
those
I think
things.
survival is a bare minimum,
Yeah.
right? It's like, we can dream big and have all the wishes that we
Mhm.
want, and we can have all that with the cesarean birth though too.
Yes.
Like we
For
can
sure.
feel loved and sacred and safe and secure and all of that with the cesarean birth. It does not, like be that way. But yeah,
Wow.
it is intense. But yeah. All right. Sorry, Blue.
And I was determined the same way that I was about breastfeeding, that I wanted to have, um, you know, a vaginal birth. And again, just touching on what Angie said, I knew that something didn't feel right about the way that, her heart rate was dropping on the contractions. Live was way more important, even though the doctor staff at that time, the medical staff at that time didn't seem as concerned as me. I knew that I was more worried about her than I was about making my, game plan happen.
Yeah.
That I would completely do a C-section if that's what's needed, which is
Yeah.
What was
I brought.
needed. I
Yeah.
actually loved like what you said the doctors said to you or the provider said to you when they came back in and they validated your, like
Intuition.
Intuition.
you knew,
intuition.
yeah, you like fought
I was
you,
just going to mention
yeah, like
that they listen to you, and that's the problem with Black Indigenous people is when we have an inkling or intuition about our care or something with our body, we get ignored,
we often get ignored. Yeah.
and then we die sometimes,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so that was really important to know that they listen to you, and that's a huge part of advocating and saying and vocalizing those things, because it's not always the case.
Totally. And you may not have felt it in the moment, or maybe you did, but by saying that and acknowledging it and saying like you were right, you as a
Mhm.
mom, like your intuition was correct, that helps to build your confidence, right? And a birth that's not going the way you had planned, which can really like derail someone's confidence. But just a comment like that, which is so simple for a provider to say, right? And acknowledging that, like, hey, mom, you were right. We weren't, like we weren't, right? Like you were right, can help to like build that self-efficacy and that confidence back in you. So that you're like, oh, my gut is correct. Like my intuition is correct, and it builds trust in yourself for a parent. And so I love that you shared that that's what they said to you,
Yeah.
because a lot of providers don't say that, right? Like a lot, especially when things go awry.
Yeah, especially with like just knowing the confidence in your body. I mean, confidence is really key when it comes to breastfeeding. Me and Cami always talk about that in our training, is if you're not confident in your birth and what happens, it's hard to be confident in how you're going to feed your baby. And, sometimes when it doesn't work out with a cesarean, oftentimes mothers blame their body that didn't do the things they needed to do to, one, have a birth that they wanted, but two, not having the breastfeeding that they wanted. And so, yeah, it's the first time I heard
Yeah.
something like a doctor listening to someone's a brown mom's intuition was
Totally.
part of their decision making.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Cool.
I will completely say that I felt heard by the medical staff there, and I was totally blessed with that, like you said, because I've heard of all these same things that we're talking about as minority and Native women. We know, I won't lie to you, our favorite thing to do is to lay down and nurse.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, I literally was just thinking that in my brain. I was like, I know these two lay down and nap together.
That's what I was thinking
That's
too.
nap time. That's after 9
He's
nap.
like, she's like, hello, lay down with me.
I don't understand, because that's like sleep, because so if I nurse her and she falls asleep, a lot of times she'll wake up. So our thing is to lay down and cuddle, and then nice little nap, and she was just so confused.
It's all good. It's all good. Well, if you is there anything else that you want to share with us? Because I don't want to keep her unhappy. If you guys need to lay down, we can, totally be good here. If you don't have anything else that you think that needs to be shared, we can, just kind of be done with it, but it's totally up to you. We're also open to keep going for a few more minutes. So whatever you decide is best for you and baby.
No, I think that I said most of what needed to be said. Luckily I was a success. I had everything lined up. For me to be a success, but I think it's helpful for people to see where a lot of this could have went wrong. So
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
Time for us to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Blue. We
Yeah,
appreciate
thank
you
you.
and Selena for sharing your story. And
Yep.
we just appreciate you both and are so happy that you guys have found a place that works for you. And thank you for working so hard.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Blue.
Yeah.
Miigwech. All right. So thanks everybody for joining this conversation today. Thank you again, Blue, for joining us last minute as a panelist here and being vulnerable with us and sharing your story. I know that it was a rough one, but I also know you well enough to know that there was a whole lot of determination there, especially, just even getting Selena. I know that you were so for many years trying to become a mama, and I'm so happy that you got your wish and made, those dreams come true, because I know that you tried for so long to become a mama. So I'm glad that, you're in the position that you're in now and things are moving along well. And so once again, thanks to Kim and Cami for being here, and also to Mark behind the scenes. For anybody that has any other friends or coworkers that need to be a part of these conversations or listening to the information that's being shared here, please feel free to share the website with them, nooniproject.com. We have I think 4 more
One more.
four
Four
more
more.
webinars between today and tomorrow. And you can find all the information on the website for what the subject areas are on those webinars. So again, thank you so much for coming. Hopefully we'll see you on the next one. Yeah, that's it. Miigwech and Bamapi.
Yeah, Toksha.
Bye. Go Net.